The following is made up completely of my own research and may differ with other opinions made by professionals and individuals. The opinions presented are entirely my own. The following content may not hold up over time and may contain mistakes despite my best efforts to exclude such. Viewer discretion is advised. The following contains sexual themes, reproductive slavery, and themes of abuse along with other serious topics. If you have trouble handling these themes, feel free to navigate away now. Today, we'll analyze The Handmaid's Tale by Margret Atwood. The Handmaid's Tale is a classic, first published in 1985. In this novel, we follow a handmaid named Fred, who is the main character and narrator. The story is set in the Republic of Gilead, a dystopian, totalitarian society. Throughout the book, we get a peek at the inner workings of this society from Fred's perspective, including a glimpse into her own past and inner turmoil. While this novel is expertly written, there are a few things we should know before we open those black and red covers. Gilead is a totalitarian society, but what does that mean? Google Dictionary defines it as totalitarianism is a system of government that is centralized and dictatorial and requires complete subservience to the state. End quote. Totalitarianism contains both private and public spheres of society, not to be confused with fascism. Whilst all totalitarian societies and governments are fascist, not all fascist societies and governments are totalitarian. For example, Nazi Germany was both, however the USSR was fascist and not totalitarian. But I hear you ask, what the hell's fascism then? Well, Wikipedia states, fascism is a far-right, authoritarian, and alternist political ideology and movement, characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forced suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy, subordination of individual interests for the perceived good of the nation or race, regimentation of society and the economy. Well, that was super wordy and long, so let's break it down. Vatko does it best when they state, quote, in totalitarianism, the state's power is unlimited and controls all aspects of life, whereas fascism combines extremes part of totalitarianism and authoritarianism. The Handmaid's Tale discusses fertility, reproduction, and sex throughout the book. However, we need to understand the meaning behind it. You're probably sitting here this whole time wondering what a handmaid is if you haven't read the book yet and for some reason this interested you. A handmaid is a fertile woman whose purpose is to have the children of her commander, often an elite man. To do this, handmaids are forced into sexual and reproductive slavery. Britannica defines sexual slavery as, quote, sex slavery is a condition in which one human being is owned by another and forced or otherwise coerced into working in the sex trade, end quote. Wikipedia defines reproductive slavery as, quote, coerced sexual relations and forced pregnancies of enslaved women and girls intended to increase the number of enslaved people and their own wealth, end quote. Welcome back to everyone that skipped that part. Now that we have all of the boring definitions out of the way, we can get into the meat of this discussion. To analyze this book, we need to identify the central themes. The Handmaid's Tale is a cautionary tale that warns against the dangers of religious extremism, totalitarianism, and the loss of human rights. But how does this parallel to a modern context? At the time of recording, it's currently April 2025, and I'll be focusing primarily on the United States. In 2022, Roe v. Wade was overturned. Roe v. Wade held federal protections for abortion, reserving a right to privacy. Quote, under Roe, a trimester framework was used to set standards on when an abortion could be restricted. The first trimester of pregnancy, an abortion was unrestricted. In the second trimester, the state was allowed to add some restrictions but not outlaw abortions in the interest of the pregnant person's health. In the third trimester, the fetus was considered viable, and the state could regulate or outlaw abortions in the interest of the fetus, except when it was necessary to preserve the life or health of the pregnant woman. End quote. This is stated by NPR.org. The overturning of Roe v. Wade allowed states to fully control abortion laws and access. This takes us to current day. Quote, the third Oklahoma bill to take effect this summer would make it a felony to perform an abortion, punishable by 10 years in prison. This bill contains no exceptions for rape or incest. NPR.org states, Oklahoma's governor, Kevin Stitt, is responsible for this bill. While talk of nationwide abortion bans continue, people fear as right-leaning states discuss the possibility of introducing the death penalty for receiving or providing an abortion. This is a direct parallel to The Handmaid's Tale. On page 43 of The Handmaid's Tale, quote, each has a placard hung around his neck to show why he has been executed. A drawing of a human fetus. They were doctors then, in the time before, when such things were legal. End quote. In this instance, Fred explains how doctors involved in performing abortions had been executed and hung on the wall as an example. This also applies to Fred's current day. Recently, in February of 2025, a human egg farm was found in Georgia, discovered after a brave woman managed to escape. Mirror states, they claim that on the dystopian farm, criminals force-administered them hormones to stimulate their ovaries before anesthesiazing them once a month to remove their egg cells. It was thought the eggs were sold to people wanting children on the black market. End quote. All women were held against their will, estimating 100 individuals. This too also closely compares to the realities of The Handmaid's Tale. Earlier we identified reproductive slavery, and this is such a modern-day equivalent of that. While these women, who remain anonymous, were not necessarily forced into sex, they were still used for their bodies with the intent of producing children, and their consent was still called into question. This is truly horrific, and my heart goes out to these women. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. While I won't dive too deep into the religious extremism aspect, as that conversation is simply bigger than me and would require research of its own, there's a clear lack of divide between government and religion in modern-day America, with Christian values driving abortion bans, immigration laws, and other legislation. Now, I've been talking about totalitarianism a lot through this, but we haven't talked about it yet in this capacity. The Handmaid's Tale is an example of a totalitarian society, as it has control over both public and private life. Very recently, this month in fact, Donald Trump has been placing tariffs on a large number of countries. This impacts both the private and public life of U.S. citizens. It also exhibits control over its citizens as it results in higher prices and attempts to control the economic market. While this itself is not a sure tell sign of totalitarian society or government, it's definitely a start, and it does lean towards fascism. There's also been several attempts to stop acts of civil disobedience or protests amongst U.S. citizens, such as arresting protesters and guarding Tesla dealerships. But what does this mean to us as individuals, and what does it teach me? And why is this important in the first place? Well, it taught me that anyone can fall to a fascist or totalitarian society or government. It teaches its readers to be wary of its behaviors, and it provides more insight into the workings of societies and governments like this. In a modern-day context, this is a great example of Trump supporters and people who support right-wing agendas. Lindsay Deltwell said, quote, "Fear trumps all emotions. Defiance isn't easy. Hopelessness breeds boldness. Life as you know it isn't guaranteed, and a loveless world is bleak." In her article, 10 Important Lessons I Learned from The Handmaid's Tale, posted on HuffPost.com. When in a terrifying world, Fred's fear for her daughter trumps all other emotions, going through so many risks to even see a picture of her. Fred's defiance is nowhere near simple and takes great effort to orchestrate. In a hopeless world, Fred becomes bold, visiting her commander at night. Every day, Fred woke up not knowing if it would be her last, and in a loveless world, she takes every risk to see Nick. Life isn't worth living without being able to have whimsies. And The Handmaid's Tale teaches us that. It teaches us that in a bleak world, we need something to keep us going. And in every sentence, every word, every dip of ink, it teaches us that. It teaches us to be wary of the world going to shit. But most importantly, it teaches us how to find something to keep us going when it does. Thank you.